Who are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Business Lessons from the Military. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about military history, military doctrine, the practices of great military leaderships, and distill from them lessons that we can apply to our business and professional practices. So today, which is January 7th, 2025, is basically one day, tomorrow, meaning the 210th anniversary of the Battle of New Orleans. Now, for those of you who remember, there was a song decades ago about the Battle of New Orleans and about Andrew Jackson and who was the American leader in the battle, and the battle has become really part of American military and historical lore over the last 2 centuries. There's a few, I think, interesting lessons that we can draw from this battle that haven't come up in some of the others that we've examined over the previous months. So just to give you some historical background, the battle was fought on, as I mentioned, January 8th, 1815. It was the final major battle of the War of 1812, which was between the United States and Great Britain. Now, for those of you who remember your American history, so the War of 1812 really was fought. It was almost like a second war for independence in a way. But among the issues were that Great Britain was impressing American sailors, meaning they would stop an American ship, take the American sailors off of it, and force them to work on their ships under the sort of guise that they were not taking Americans, they were taking British subjects, which was clearly not the case, at least in the vast majority of circumstances. So the other issue was Great Britain was trying to restrict American trade. And so the slogan of the War of 1812 was free trade and sailors' rights. Right? Those were the two main issues. The war did not start out so good for the United States. In fact, the British landed an army that captured Washington, D.C. and burned down the major buildings there. And it was actually during one of the battles of the War of 1812 that Francis Scott Key, who had been captured by the British and he was on a prison barge, saw a battle going on, and he composed the lyrics for the Star-Spangled Banner, which became the national anthem for the United States. And some of the words of that song, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, in air, gave proof through the fight that the flag was still there. And he saw the Star-Spangled Banner was the 15-starred, 15-striped American flag that had succeeded the Betsy Ross flag with the 13 stars in a circle and the 13 red and white stripes, the so-called Betsy Ross flag. Historically, it's probably not the case that Betsy Ross designed the flag. Because 2 states had joined the Union between the original 13 colonies and 1812. So the battle was fought outside of New Orleans, basically along the Mississippi River. And It was actually fought about 2 weeks after the treaty ending the War of 1812 had been signed. So the treaty is known as the Treaty of Ghent. Ghent at that time, which is now, I should say, a part of modern day Belgium, at that time was a part of the French Empire. It was a big textile manufacturing center. So the Treaty of Ghent was signed on December 24th, 1814. And then, like I said, about 2 weeks later, on January 8th, the Battle of New Orleans was fought. And as you can imagine, communication was slow in those days. You couldn't pick up a phone and let the folks in America know that the treaty had been signed. That news had to come by ship, and the ship, or the information that the war was over, did not reach New Orleans by the time the battle was fought. So the idea that the British had was they were going to capture the city of New Orleans, and in so doing control the Mississippi River in a way that would hamper, if not cut off, American trade, but also prevent American expansion. So it was really a power play on the part of the British. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, the British forces were led by Major General Andrew Jackson, and the British forces were led by Major General Sir Edward Pakenham. And the performance of these two generals was widely disparate. So Andrew Jackson knew he was going to be fighting a defensive campaign, and so he prepared defensive fortifications, and he really took advantage of the local geography as well as the militia forces that he had at his disposal. But not only that, so aside from the soldiers and sailors, he also recruited free Black Americans. He recruited Native Americans, and even pirates, or actually privateers, who were led by the infamous Jean Lafitte. And it was really this very sort of, and I'll talk about this in the lessons, but this very diverse group of fighters that Andrew Jackson put together, and in order to defend their positions. The British, on the other hand, they launched a frontal assault on Jackson's defenses, and I think that General Pakenham, because he had a much larger force, I think he thought he was just going to basically overwhelm the American defenders. The outcome was not anything like that. So the British suffered 2,000 casualties, including General Pakenham being killed in the battle. The American losses were minimal, maybe around 70 casualties. So we're talking about, almost 30-to-1 ratio of casualties in the battle. Okay. And in the aftermath of the battle, it really became a symbol of American resistance. And as I mentioned at the beginning, while the British had really held the upper hand in the beginning of the war, including essentially burning down the American Capitol in Washington, D.C., it was, I think, very gratifying for Americans, and especially for American fighters, that in the end they so thoroughly trounced the British at the Battle of New Orleans. And so even though it didn't affect the outcome of the war, because the war was already over when it was fought, nonetheless, Americans took a lot of pride. And that's why there are these songs about the battle even to this day. The historic significance of the battle is that even though the war ended, under the Treaty of Ghent, the fact that the British were so resoundingly defeated really kind of ended Great Britain's ability to have any kind of significant impact on the growth and direction of direction and development of the United States of America. And so that's why the war, I should say, is sometimes cited as being almost like a second war for independence. So between the end of the American Revolution in 1783 and the beginning of the War of 1812, which is a period of about 12 and 17, 29 years, almost 30 years, Britain still had an enormously large impact on what was happening in America. Post-War of 1812, much, much less so. So of the notable figures who were involved, or the notable people, I should say, who were involved in the battle. I mentioned Andrew Jackson. He was a major general in the U.S. Army, and he was the commander of the American forces. So Jackson was a charismatic leader. He also was quite an able strategic planner, and he was really kind of an everyman's soldier in that sense, and that was why he was able to cobble together this group of very diverse fighters. His victory at the Battle of New Orleans catapulted him to national fame, and it indeed helped him become the 7th president of the United States. Now, Andrew Jackson was really kind of a man of the people, which was different than the men who had become president prior to him. There was a lot of sort of almost like poo-pooing of him when he was in the White House, as he was uncouth and all these kind of things that were said. I mean, not unlike how President Trump was looked at by the sort of Washington establishment during his first term. Another major personality involved was the pirate Jean Lafitte. He was the leader of I have to make sure I get this term right, the Barratarian privateers. That was just the group that he followed. And Lafitte considered himself an American. He wanted to support the nascent country. And what he brought was a great deal of specialized knowledge that he put at the disposal of General Jackson, including knowledge of the local terrain, which was just absolutely crucial to the victory. On the British side, Major General Sir Edward Pakenham, so he was the commander of the British forces, and he was killed in the battle. He made a very foolish decision in retrospect, what many people, I should say, consider to be a foolish decision in making this frontal assault on Jackson's defenses. And in the end, he did pay for that with his life. Like a lot of the British officers, both during the War of 1812 and the American Revolution, there was a certain degree of arrogance that they held toward their American opponents, and it did not stand them well. It didn't stand them well against George Washington, of course, who led American forces during the War for Independence, nor did it at the Battle of New Orleans. But these were the leaders, but the sort of more rank and file. So first of all, most of the sort of soldiers, actual fighters, they were civilian militia, okay, as opposed to a trained army. And they were volunteers from Tennessee, Kentucky, and Louisiana. They included frontiersmen, that local farmers. And so again, these were not trained soldiers in the sense that we think of an army now. The frontiersmen especially certainly knew how to shoot well, but they did not know military tactics. They were not, thoroughly embedded with, military drilling and all that sort of thing. So these were basically Americans who were defending their country, defending what they saw as their liberty, and the liberty of their, brethren sailors who were being impressed on the high seas. But it wasn't just the militia, as I noted before. So there were free African Americans who were soldiers, and as you might imagine, in the South, this was, not uncontroversial, but they were treated, just like the other soldiers because they were free men, as opposed to, of course, the black slaves who were part of the bedrock of the Southern economy. And as well, American Indians, Native American warriors, primarily from the Choctaw Nation, which was in the southeastern United States at that time, they were also part of this force that Andrew Jackson had at his, not disposal is not really, but had as part of his force. So I called this show Recruit Heterodoxy, and I think this is the key lesson from the Battle of New Orleans. So, as I just described, Andrew Jackson's forces, these were not rank and file soldiers. These were farmers, they were frontiersmen, they were Native Americans, they were freed blacks, they were privateers. And this was by no means a homogeneous group, either in social status or in occupation or in education, knowledge, nothing like that. Each group, though, brought something to the table that actually made victory on the part of the Americans more likely. So, as I mentioned, Lafitte's pirates, I mean, they knew certainly the terrain very well. They knew how the British would probably have to attack. The local militia, especially the Louisiana militia, and the local free blacks, as well as the Native Americans, knew the regional terrain extremely well. They had lived there, right? And so they were able to advise Jackson and his subordinate commanders on how to take advantage of that terrain in a way that was most to their advantage and would cause the British to be funneled toward them in a way that would allow them to wreak this devastating blow on the British forces. So, had Andrew Jackson had a homogenous, well-trained army with him of the same size as the force he actually had, it's not at all clear that he would have prevailed in this battle. If they were professional soldiers, they probably wouldn't have come from the area. They wouldn't have had knowledge of local terrain. They wouldn't have known how to create the kind of battlements and defensive structures that, based on the, materials that were locally available, all of those things. And so this very heterodox force that Andrew Jackson was able to not only put together, but hold together, lead, in battle together really was the major strength of his force. And in the end, it's what brought him victory. And so too, in the workplace, this, what we want to do is recruit people who are going to bring a broad range of skills that we need, a broad range of experience that we need, and a broad range of perspectives on how we can attack the challenges that our businesses and professional practices face, and how we might be able to deal with them effectively. So it's completely counter to the best interests of our businesses and practices to have what amount to a bunch of yes men working for us. What we want are, as one of the Marine Corps colonels I worked for say, we want people who will speak truth to power and not be afraid that they're going to pay a price for giving their honest perspective. Oh, excuse me. And so, like I said, that is the major lesson. When we have people with different points of views, different knowledge, skills, and experience, we enable the highest level of creative problem solving to be there. So I know in my practice, the people I look to that I like to work with, because I'm almost always working as part of a team, I look for people who approach the administration of estates differently than I do. So for example, my friend Bill, he's always driving forward. Let's move, let's move, let's move, let's move. Whereas other people on the team may be saying, wait, we think we need to hold back here. And typically as the team leader, I can examine both those perspectives and get a better sense of when we need to drive forward rapidly, or when it will be better off sitting back and gathering more information, or seeing how things will develop before taking action. Right. So the differences of opinion make for a stronger overall ability to deal with the challenges that inevitably come up when administrating trusts and estates. Okay, so this is something that the idea of recruiting heterodoxy. This is something I do in my own professional life. Now, I don't have people who work directly for me. We all have our own businesses, but we can still look for that same sort of heterodox approach. And by the way, we see this playing out as the new administration is getting ready to take over in Washington, D.C. The people that President Trump has is planning to nominate for the various cabinet posts and other important positions, they have a very broad range of perspectives, et cetera, right? Who would have thought that we would have had the son of Robert Kennedy, right, in the same administration as the fellow who's going to be or who's been nominated to be in charge of border security, who's Robert Kennedy comes from a long time liberal family, and I sorry, I went up on the name of the fellow who's going to be in charge of border security. Very, very conservative minded individual, right? On the one hand, Tulsi Gabbard has been nominated, and on the other hand, Pete Hegsworth has been nominated for Secretary of Defense. So and I think this is wise to do that, because you know, the president will get the broadest range of input, and that can only lead to making better decisions. Okay, so this idea of heterodox applies not just in business, but I think it applies in many areas, if not all areas of our lives. When we're looking to develop close friendships, while it may be comforting to have a group of people around us who always agree with us, that's probably not going to give us the best life. We're better off having close friends who have at least somewhat differing perspectives from ours, similar values, but differing perspectives. And that way they can help us guide our lives to really maximize our potential. Okay, so recruit heterodoxy. That's lesson number one. Lesson number two. Strategic preparation is crucial. So I was in a meeting earlier this morning of a veterans group that a friend of mine put together. We're all there to help each other, with our businesses and professional practices. And one of the men in the group mentioned that he had started out. Let me take us back. We did a thing after introducing ourselves where we talked about what was the best lesson we learned in 2024 and what was our big goal for 2025. So one fellow mentioned in 2024, he started out and he had done a very intensive strategic planning and he had everything all organized and arranged. And within a month, the whole thing had blown up. It didn't work in the least, right? And what he had failed to do was to have any sort of backup plans to this very detailed business strategic plan that he put together. And as a result, he floundered for a while until he was able to kind of get his business footing back under him and move on, right? So, unfortunately, and this was, the lesson that he learned, proper strategic preparation is not one-dimensional, right? It has to, you have to have a strategic plan, but then you also have to recognize that once you start enacting that plan, things can very quickly unravel, especially if we're faced with competition, unexpected occurrences. So then we've got to be able to pivot, okay? And this is something that Andrew Jackson looked at quite carefully, along with all of his lieutenants. Is he was able to really understand the terrain, the materials that were available to build fortifications, how someone trying to attack them, how they would do that. And by gathering all that information, they were able to put together a strategic plan that was very effective in maintaining their defense of those fortifications. I have no doubt that if the British had, broken through at a certain point, that there were contingency plans for containing that that breakthrough, so that it didn't become a rout and end up in the loss of the battle by the Americans, right? That was all part of Jackson's plan. And in so doing, by being so strategically prepared, he was able to defeat a larger force. Okay, so strategic preparation, okay, oftentimes means we can punch above our weight, to use maybe a somewhat overused phrase. Okay, so in business too, right? We need to conduct market research. We need to stress test products, etc. But the main thing is, we need to position our businesses so that if the unexpected happens, we can pivot, we can be flexible, and we don't get knocked out of the game merely because our plans, for various reasons, sort of rapidly fall apart. Okay, so being prepared at the strategic level then allows us to make the changes at the operational and tactical level. Right, we've talked about these three levels other times on these shows. Right, we need to have that strategic preparation, and with various backup plans, and that way we can shift when and where we need to shift. Okay, so number two, strategic preparation. Number three, know your opponent. Okay, so the fact of the matter is, and this is where, in particular, Jean Lafitte and the Choctaw Indians, Choctaw warriors, were such a huge help to Andrew Jackson in being victorious at the Battle of New Orleans. So they brought knowledge of the enemy, right, and how the enemy might pursue the battle, which militia from Kentucky and Tennessee certainly weren't going to have. Okay, so and this was what allowed this kind of very deep local knowledge was what allowed Jackson to not only anticipate the British attack plan, but in some ways force the British to attack on in a way that the Americans wanted them to attack, in a way that was most beneficial for the Americans, right? The Americans were not going to stop the British from attacking. That was going to happen. The best they could do was, on the one hand, prepare their defenses and prepare strategically so they could be flexible in defending, and on the other hand, take steps so that the British would be, in essence, lulled or almost forced into attacking in a way that made it the easiest for the Americans to defend their positions and defeat the British, right? So knowing their opponent, and by the way, I think the Americans knew that the British in general were quite contemptuous of the American forces. The British leadership was arrogant, and I think that the Americans took advantage of those attitudes to their benefit as defenders, right? So again, in business, we need to do the same thing. First of all, we need to know who are our competitors, or not so much opponents in business. I wouldn't say that's perhaps a little bit too warlike, but who are our competitors, right? And what strengths and weaknesses do they have? So I have talked about this before. In my business as an independent trustee or a private fiduciary, we go by different names, right? I have the ability to be much more flexible, much more nimble, quicker than a trust company does. Okay. And so one of the weaknesses that my competition, at least that part of my competition, trust companies, which are usually larger, more highly capitalized, et cetera, is they have, because of their size, they are somewhat bound by policies and procedures and those kind of things. And to do something out of the ordinary means they kind of have to go up their chain of command in order to make that decision. And in my case, so I can look at the problem in front of me or the issue in front of me. I can get the team together and we can deal with it very, very quickly. So to give you an example, something that's come up just in the last 24 hours, someone is planning on nominating me to administer a probate. And the major asset in that estate is a house that evidently hasn't been occupied, it appears, for a couple of years. Now, here in California, we have I think this is not just in California, but here in California, we have a problem with vacant houses essentially being taken over and lived in by people who have no, certainly no legal right to be there. They have no business being there at all. And so it's crucial that we protect that asset. Now, it's going to be a while before there's even a court hearing to formally nominate someone to administrate the estate, hopefully, probably me. But in the meantime, if someone has broken into the house and is living there, they can do considerable damage. And, that could be an unrecoverable loss, to the estate. And so we're looking at what do we do in order to, potentially prevent this, even though my team and I are not, officially appointed yet to administer, the estate. And so we're hopefully going to have a meeting a little bit later today to talk about that, so that tomorrow we can already, jump on this and get this taken care of for the benefit of all the heirs to this estate, right? So the ability to quickly recognize core issues, to be able to get very quickly get the people together who are necessary in order to make a decision, and then to execute that decision rapidly. All of that is a big competitive advantage that I have. And I know that, at least my trust company competitors, they can't do that. Okay. It would take them days, if not, a week or two, to do what hopefully we're going to be able to do in maybe 24 to 36 hours. Okay, so that's just an example of knowing your competition, know their strengths, but know their weaknesses too, and then make your strengths their weaknesses, right? Or be weak in the area, be strong in the areas where they're weak, I guess is a better way to put it, right? So that's what we want to do, and that's the lesson that we can learn from Andrew Jackson and his subordinate commanders like Jean Lafitte, knowing their opponent. Okay, next, use geography to your advantage, and the overall, in this case, the overall sort of battlefield. Use them to he used them to his advantage, right? So Jackson was able to take advantage of the natural geography, including the Mississippi, including the swamps. And in essence, what he did was, by the way he set up his defenses, he essentially required the British to go through this bottleneck in order to mount their attack. And by doing that, he was able basically to, mow them down, right? So, this ties into the other issues that we've been talking about already. But, there are factors in the marketplace that we can take advantage of to the disadvantage of our competition. Okay, so there's a famous example told by a fellow by the name of Zig Ziglar. And he talks about he went to a luncheon for a local board of realtors. These are real estate agents. And it was during there was a recession going on. And so at least in this particular area, not a lot of homes were being sold. And so he's sitting there with a bunch of real estate agents, and he turns to the one on his, I forget if it's his left or right, but anyway, and he's talking to him, and the person is just singing the blues. There's no business. People have no money. They're not buying houses. He says, my business is just falling apart. And and he was obviously, very, very gloomy about sort of the context of the marketplace at that time. And so then Zig Ziglar says he turns to the other person and he asks the same question. It's like, how's it going? And the person starts out the same way the other one did by saying, well, there's a recession going on. And Ziegler steels himself to hear the same kind of litany of complaints. And to his surprise, the person said, but as a result, there are people who aren't working, but they know that they're going to get back to work at some point, and so they have a lot of time to go out, look at prospective houses, get a sense of what the market is all about. And I've never been busier showing people houses and setting up the groundwork for a huge resurgence once the economy turns around. It's like, wow, that's really a great way to look at things, right? So the first person was letting his business fall apart. The second person was seeing that, look, the context of the situation is what it is. So how do I take advantage of the context of the situation in order to make things as best as possible? So when the economy is soft, people have time. Okay, so she, they could speak with her. They weren't busy, running here, running there, and she was making a lot of contacts and creating a lot of relationships that she planned on being able to serve these people once the economic climate turned around. Okay, so we can do the same thing, right? We can take advantage of changes in the economy to focus or refocus our attention on perhaps a different part of our business that will allow us to keep building contacts, building potential clients and customers in a way that we can take advantage of in the future. So start laying that groundwork. We can also, if business is slow, for example, we can use that time to do some more detailed planning. We can use that time to take some classes, get more knowledge. We can use that time to maybe do some pro bono work, so that we're keeping our hand in the game. We're doing more transactions, or we're helping more people. Okay, we may not be getting paid for it, but the experience that we're getting from doing that will still be useful. And at the same time, we're building our reputation in the marketplace. Okay, so understanding and using the context of in which we're currently doing business really can give us a competitive advantage. Finally, and I think this is a key point that really reflects on Jackson's leadership, is he was a charismatic leader. Okay, and so he was able to keep his forces' morale high. Okay, now this was despite them being outnumbered, right? And there's nothing like, being in an outnumbered army for being depressing, right? Like, we're going to get overrun because we're small in number and the opposition is great in number. No. And many times, unfortunately, that is the case. Other times, though, a great leader can, pull from within himself and also point out what the circumstances are, so that the people that he's leading can sort of sorry, what's the word I'm looking for? They almost get like infected with the optimism of their leader, the sort of can-do spirit. And what a small force can do with strong morale is often surprising. Now, the other thing, and this I think is sometimes overlooked when we look at military leadership, is Andrew Jackson, when Jean Lafitte, the pirate who himself was quite a charismatic leader, offered his help, Andrew Jackson took it. Now, some leaders, they don't want to have another charismatic leader as a subordinate because they're afraid that maybe that charismatic subordinate will outshine them. Andrew Jackson was not concerned about that. He understood that having other charismatic subordinates makes his job easier to sustain the morale of his troops. And so I think that is a key lesson for us to have in our businesses and professional practices. So we want to be inspiring leaders. We want to foster the loyalty and the productivity of our teams and the resilience of our teams. One of the best ways we can do that is by having those around us, in subordinate leadership positions, exhibit those same ability to elicit loyalty and productivity and resilience. Okay, all of those are morale builders. And so if the entire burden, rather than having the entire burden of sustaining morale on us, if we can spread it out among the leadership team in general, we will be much, much more effective. And so I think rather than necessarily feeling like we have to be the person, we're so I wish I could remember who it was who said this, but he was talking about the people he hires, and he said, um, I generally need to be the dumbest person in the room, right? In other words, he surrounds himself with people who are smarter than he is, who have greater experience, greater knowledge, greater skills than he has, right? That's who we want to bring in, okay? Because that will build us the strongest team and ensure us the greatest success. Okay, so just real quickly, reviewing the 5 lessons that I pulled from the Americans' victory at the Battle of New Orleans now, or as of tomorrow, 210 years ago. First of all, recruit heterodoxy. Second, prepare strategically. Third, know your competition. Fourth, use the context of the situation to your advantage. And fifth, maintain high morale. If we can focus on doing those things, we stand the best chance of meeting the goals, the objectives that we set for our businesses and professional practices. By the way, we also raise the likelihood of having a team of people who are satisfied, who enjoy their work, who are inspired by working as part of our team, and that also bodes well for the future. So I thank you very much for joining me today. Lamin, thanks for your comments. I really appreciate it. It's always great to know that you're tuning in. And for my other viewers, I see there's a number of viewers who've tuned in live. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Looking ahead to the rest of the week, tomorrow, Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, my show, People Making Money. I'm going to be talking about charismatic. I'm going to be talking about one of the most well-known figures in the self-help world. Actually, he was one of the people who pioneered it, Dale Carnegie. And we're going to be looking at both his the history of his life, the biography of his life, and his philosophy. So if you know a little bit about Dale Carnegie, I invite you to join me tomorrow, because I think you'll learn more. If you have never heard of Dale Carnegie, or maybe you've heard the name, but that's all, please tune in. You will definitely benefit from understanding the approach that Dale Carnegie brought to success and how it really changed the way professional and business success was attained here in the United States. And then next week on Monday at 10 a.m. is Trusts and Estates Weekly. Again, that's 10 a.m. Pacific time. And my guest is Michael Siegel. Okay, so I hope you'll tune in to hear what Michael has to say. And then 7 days from today, we'll be back with the next edition of Business Lessons from the Military. So again, thank you so much for joining me. Wishing you a wonderful rest of the day. And signing off as I always do. Marie, darling, you are my belle. You grew up not too far away from where the Battle of New Orleans was fought in the great state of Alabama. And I miss you every day. It's always my delight to pay tribute to you at the end of each of my shows. So courage at all times, my friends. Look forward to seeing you soon. All the best.